So one thing that I'm asked a whole lot is about how I go about editing my photos. And before I really even get into any of this, I want to say when it comes to editing, it's a very open, creative part of photography. There's really no right, there's no wrong, there's guidelines, but that's as with anything in art, there's guidelines. Anything that I say in this video might not work for you. It might work for other people, might not work for you. You might come away with a few bits learned from this. But yeah, there's no one size fits all when it comes to editing. If anything, I hope that it could at least be a good refresher if you don't learn anything new. So we're gonna go over like 10 or so images, a few that I am going to be doing some more extensive editing on, and then a few that really show that not every image needs to have the extreme editing treatment that some other ones do. I never really go too extreme. Well, I can't say never. I do every now and then. And that's really the main point here. The main point here is to have fun. It's an art. Don't get stressed about it. Don't let it take up too much of your time. I know I'm making an editing video, but don't sit at the computer for 2 hours cycling through editing videos. We've all done it. It's fun to get a little bit of a refresher here and there, learn a few new things, but don't absorb yourself into it. Spread it out. Learn a lot more hands-on. Take some tips away from these videos, apply them to stuff that you want to do. I think that's the best way to do things. You know, I've applied little bits and pieces that I've learned from other people over time, and I've put a lot of my own twists into it, my own feeling, my own, you know, what I want to do, because the way that I shoot is the way that I shoot. You know, I'm shooting what I'm shooting what I see, and I'm editing my images for how I saw that scene, not how anybody else saw it. So, yeah, I don't know, let's just hop into Lightroom and go through these images. So you're probably wondering, first off, why do I have a different shirt on? Do I change my shirts when I edit? No, that would be ridiculous. Everybody knows that I only change my pants when I edit. Sometimes I edit pantsless. Usually I edit pantsless. You're probably also wondering, why is there terrible lighting now? Well, that's because this window is terrible. When I recorded the intro to this video, it was real late at night. And then I got real tired after I recorded the intro, and I went to bed. So I'm gonna start first with this photo that I took out west last year at Bug Ranch, which is right outside of Cadillac Ranch in Texas. So before I even start editing, I want to address a couple things about this photo. First thing being the colors. So just the natural colors of the photo. So the orangish, yellowish grass in the foreground here, and then this blue of the sky, they just work really nicely together. They complement each other very well. Second, and probably actually the most important thing here, is the lighting was great for this time of day. The sky was a nice deep blue, you know, nothing is blown out and overexposed, and I was able to expose pretty properly for the gas station itself, for the foreground, for the sky. You can see that everything is very even and nothing is blown out. You can also see in the histogram up here. So I'm not gonna go like in depth about the panels or anything on this video. I could do separate videos for that. This is just gonna be how I edit. First, I'll start by cropping. I don't like this little tiny sliver of the building here on the left-hand side. It's just bright. To me, it's distracting, so I'm just gonna come up here with the crop tool and I'm gonna get rid of it. And I think that just looks nicer. Just that little subtle thing. The clouds, I could definitely brighten up a little bit. I think I can get the blue to pop a little bit more. I think I can warm the image up. I think it might be a little bit too green. So to remove some of that green cast, I'm going to add a couple points of magenta, just a couple small points. And I'm gonna warm it up a little bit on the temperature, you know, maybe to 5650, 5700. Now with the tone panel here, I might not even mess with that yet. I might come straight down to my hue, saturation, and luminance and do my color adjustment really quick. I'll start with the oranges and the yellows because that's one point that I really want to focus on here with the grass. First, I'm going to come down to the brightness of them, the luminance. I'm going to bring that up a little bit just so I can get that to really pop without overexposing it. I might saturate the yellows a little bit. First, I'm going to drag it to the extreme and see how much of the yellows there actually are. And then I'll saturate them, yeah, just a little bit. The oranges I'll take up and then back off until I think it looks okay. And then maybe I'll even take a couple points in the hue, you know, -3 or 4 on the orange. I'm going to brighten the blues just a little bit, and then I'm going to saturate them. Then I'm going to come up to my whites. Since I have nothing overexposed here, I have a little bit of room to play with the white point. So I can take it up just a little bit. I'm watching out for the grass because I don't want to overexpose it. And then I'll take the highlights down just a little bit. Maybe I'll take the highlights down a lot. Then that brings the grass down. Then I have some more room to play with the white point itself. Just got to be careful. It's a nice little balancing act between these. Sometimes I'll actually take the highlights, push them up, and the whites, push them down. It really depends on the image. Another thing about adding contrast, when you adjust your white point and your black point, you are adding saturation little by little as you're adding contrast. So it's good to find a nice balance as you're adding contrast to remove vibrance or remove saturation so you're not oversaturating as you go. And it's something that's subtle and you might not notice as you're editing, but then when you look at a before and after, you'll notice in a huge way you're adding a lot of saturation to a lot of things. So it's good to do your reference back and forth and see if you're really going in the direction that you want to go in. Like right now, I don't think I like those oranges as saturated as they are, or the yellows. So I took them down a little bit, but you see how there's not many points of saturation going on here in my hue, saturation, and luminance panel, and I don't have any additional vibrance and saturation here. The rest of this is coming from my white balance adjustment and my contrast adjustment. Now you can see, since I made some slight adjustments to the sky up here, the clouds seem to pop a little bit more, but they don't pop as much as I want them to. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a brush here and I'm going to paint it over the sky where all these clouds are. And then I'm going to remove the overlay and I'm just going to bring my white point up just a little bit, then bring the black point down. Adds a little bit of contrast in the sky. I can paint some in right here, and over here, over here. And you could kind of relate this to dodging and burning. I wouldn't. I mean, I guess it is in a technical sense. But if I do any like specific dodging and burning, I will usually take that into Photoshop, but I'm not going to go into Photoshop in this video. So I like the red, so maybe I want to get that red to pop out a little bit. So again, back down to my hue, saturation, luminance panel. I'll bring the brightness of the red down because it just seemed like it was a little bit bright to me. I'll take the saturation of it up and I'll change the hue by a couple points, -3. Now this graffiti here probably sits in the purples or magentas, definitely the magentas. So I want that to stick out a little bit, so I'm just gonna really push that up a lot and then saturate it a tiny bit. And I think that looks pretty good in my before and after. So without doing a whole ton to this, I did quite a bit. Another thing I can do is I can take another brush, and by taking a brush I can target just the gas station right here. Again, I remove the overlay, and I'll take the shadows up just a little bit. I don't want to take the shadows up too much because I don't want it to be flat like this. I do want some kind of darkness there. I don't want you to be able to just see inside the whole building. That kind of removes the actual dynamics from the image, and that's something that you really don't want to do. You want to watch out for removing too much dynamic from the image. You want a good balance between light and dark. So I'll bring it up a little bit, but I'm not going to bring it up too much. Just enough. Then I can mess with my black point a little bit more. And then maybe I can add a little bit of vibrance and then take a few points out of the saturation just so it's not overly saturated. Another thing that I noticed is, so I have added some contrast to this grass, but I think I want a little bit more contrast in the grass. So again, I'm just gonna grab another brush, size it properly. I'm gonna paint it over on this grass. And then I'm going to bring the white point up, bring the highlights down a little bit, bring the black point down, and then take the saturation down a little bit, not too much, because I do want the oranges in there. And then I'll view before and after. I like that. It might be a little bit too bright in there, so maybe I'll take the white point back down a little bit, highlights up, and then I'll view it with and without the mask just so I can see if I have made any kind of difference to it. And I think I made it a little bit too dark. Maybe I will take the shadows up and just really find a good balance between all of this. And if I don't like it, then I'll just get rid of it. I like that. I know I spent a little bit of time on this image. The other ones I'm just gonna kind of go through and try to explain what I'm doing as I do it, but I'm not really gonna go full into explanations just for sake of time. So this photo I already edited earlier. I was having camera issues. I thought I was recording it. I wasn't recording it, so I'm not gonna undo it. I'm just gonna go through what I did. I adjusted the white balance. I made it a little bit warmer than it was, and I took a couple points of magenta out and I made it a little bit more green. I took the highlights all the way down so that you could actually see, and I'll put up the before and after really quick. So there's the before and after. So this gives you an idea. This is a little bit more of an extreme edit than the last one, but yeah. So I took the highlights down so you got some more of the cloud popping up here. I took the white level down. So again, you get more of the cloud popping up here. You know, you see if it's here, you get a lot less of that cloud. But since I brought it down, you get more of that. I didn't mess with the shadows. I didn't mess with the black point, but I did take the exposure up, which helped the overall image to become brighter, which is in turn why I needed to take the highlights and the white point down so that I could compensate for the whole sky. So I didn't do anything with texture, clarity, dehaze. I added just a little bit of vibrance and a slight S-curve, and I boosted the midtones, and I brought up the shadows just by like a couple points. Not much to make a difference. I saturated the yellow a little bit just so this was saturated, just to the point where I liked it. I brought up the brightness of the yellow and the orange, and actually I might take the brightness down on the yellow, or I might even take a brush here onto that and take the white point down just a little bit on the highlights, just because it was a little bit too bright. And then on the roof here, there's a little bit of red here, so I just boosted the saturation of the red like crazy. It didn't make a huge difference, as you can see, but it did make a difference in the 90 area. And I didn't really do anything else. I rotated the image a little bit, just a tiny bit, just because I felt like it was just a little bit off. So next, I'm gonna go to this picture of this old schoolhouse. From the start, I think it's a little bit too green, so I'm gonna add a few points of magenta. I'm gonna warm it up a little bit. It feels a little bit cold. I'm just gonna keep pushing it up until I think it's too much and then back it off just a couple. I really want this red to stand out, so I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna come down here to my saturation for the reds. I'm gonna put it all the way up and see what it's affecting. All the way down, see what it's affecting. So it's really just affecting those reds, so that's good. So I can take that up quite high and bring the luminance of it up, just so it pops a little bit more. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the oranges. I'm gonna drag them all the way up, see what they're affecting. They're not affecting much, a little bit in the trees, a little bit on the ground, mostly on the building, so that's good. So I'm gonna bring those up about halfway. I'm gonna bring their luminance up. And again, this is another case where like I'm doing a little bit more than on some other images, but you can see it really makes that stand out. I might have made it a little bit too warm, So maybe I'll take 1 point of warmth out, make it a little bit cooler. Now I really want a little bit of this shadow to show through. I don't want too much though, because like I said before, always want to make sure to keep some kind of dynamic going. But I'll take it up until I think it's too much, then I'll back it off a little bit. Then I'll take my exposure up a little bit, being careful of the highlights. But now that I brought the highlights a little bit too bright, I can actually take the highlights down here. Then I can take my black point down a little bit. And remember, this all adds all this contrast adjustment adds saturation. So just want to be careful with that. Make sure it's not overly saturated to a point where you don't like it. And if you like it, then you like it. But bring my white point up just to make that stand out a little bit. Before and after. I think I could add a little bit of saturation, a little bit of vibrance. I could brighten the blue sky just a little bit and then saturate it. And I could brighten the greens, and that helps the grass. And I think the grass is a little bit too cool. So I might even take the hue of the green and warm it up just a little bit. That's looking pretty good. I think that looks okay to me. It's probably all I really want to do with this photo. Maybe I'll come down and mess with the color grading a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll start in the shadows and I'll drag the color to an extreme, and then I'll drag the hue around until I find a good complementing color that I like, that I think works with the existing colors in the photo. So maybe somewhere around 46 there, that complements decently. This may be a little bit better, 25. So yeah, I don't know, maybe like 43, somewhere in there. And then what I'll do is I will take the balance up, and just so it targets a little bit more of just the dark spots for the shadows. And then I'll take the saturation down so it's not overly affecting it. And then I'll go through, maybe I'll mess with the midtones and see what I can find in there. If I like anything. I kind of like that warm look with the oranges, but I don't want to go that far with it. I kind of like that blue too, so maybe I'll just stick with that blue, just a few points of blue in the midtones. And then the highlights, I'll probably go with more blue. Or I could go with yellow. I might not even do anything in the highlights. I might just not touch them at all. Let's see what we can do with global. I don't really like any of that. I mean, I like the warm look. I just don't think I'm gonna use it for this image. So a little bit of shadow color and a little bit of mid-tone color, just barely doing anything, but I think it works. If I really wanted to, I could come in here and get rid of these wires, but I'm really not gonna bother with stuff like that right now. I'm just gonna do these basic edits. So I am losing light outside right now. So I have this like dramatic light on my face from a light that I have over here, and then not much coming through the window. I feel like there could be some good dramatic music as I sip my pop. Yeah, I'm from Ohio, we say pop. Okay, I'll just go to the next image. So on this one, I'll probably do an even more involved edit. I shot this quite dark because I wanted to expose more for these highlights, which is something pretty common to do with digital photography. Not something you would want to do with film, and I'll talk about that another time too. But with digital, you can expose for the highlights because you can pull back a pretty good amount of light in your shadows. If you see here, when I drag the exposure, you can see all of that come together. And if I drag it down, you'll see that all this detail in the door is still there. So I shot it somewhere like right in between, a little bit darker. So I have all the highlight data in the door, and then anything else that I can pull from the shadows here without really ruining the image. I don't want to pull everything from the shadows like I've talked about in the other couple images, but I do want to bring some of that shadow detail back. So I'm going to start with the shadows, bring those up to a point where I like, about 46. Then I'm going to bring the exposure up, be careful of those highlights, until I like where the couch is kind of sitting. It still has a good amount of contrast with it, good amount of dark versus light, that is contrast. But now the door is overexposed. So with the door, I'm just going to take a brush and paint the brush over the door, and I'm going to take the highlights down on just that brush. I'm going to take the white level down, and I'm going to take the exposure down. I'm going to do that until I really like it where it's at. Paint a little bit more in. I think that's a pretty good balance, and I'll drag some of that across that floor there as well. I think it's a little bit too flat now though. So what I can do to get rid of this flatness to the image is I can come down here to my curve, and I can give it a little bit of an S curve. And I can bring the highlights down here. I can bring the shadows up. And right now I'm just really finding a good balance. You know, I want to bring a little bit of saturation back to the image because it was very warm and very saturated. It was sunset coming in. So again, I'm going to come up here and warm it up a little bit because it was a little bit warmer. I'm just going to find a good balance here. I think that looks good. And I'm going to straighten it up a little bit. I'll do a before and after here. And I think that looks pretty good. I don't want to overdo it. Maybe I'll bring the black point down. Maybe I'll bring the shadows back down just to bring some of that contrast back that was there. I do want this door to stand out a little bit, but I don't want it to be overexposed. I'm going to mess with the white point a little bit until I like it. I think that looks good right about there. You know, a couple of these points, maybe I'll bring the brush in just on this point and this point and this point. And I'll take the white point down just a little bit. Not too much because the sun was hitting it pretty harsh. So it was very bright. You know, I could probably bring more vibrance to it, and I could maybe even bring a little bit more warmth. And then before and after. And I think that looks fine. So now to this image. So I'm going to start by adjusting the exposure, being careful about the window. Then I'm going to take the highlights down to bring some of that window back. View before and after. Barely different, but a little bit of contrast, a little bit of saturation has been brought to it. In this case, I'm going to do a radial gradient. I'm not even going to do a brush, I'm going to do a radial gradient because I really want to focus on this part without affecting too much. I'm not going to dodge or burn specific highlights or shadows or anything. I'm just going to do straight up exposure here. Maybe I'll add a little bit of contrast. I think that looks pretty good. Makes this stand out a little bit more. I can add a little bit of vibrance to it. I think that'll be good. And I can add an S curve. So bring highlights up, the shadows down. I'm going to create a new mask with a brush here on the window. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to bring the highlights way down. I know you're probably thinking like this looks terrible. Okay, this is a really bad idea. But the reason I did that was because what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the shadows up, the white level up, and the black level down. And so now that I brought the white level up here, it didn't like do too much to the window because I darkened it before, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't make any sense. I'm probably terrible at explaining it. Again, I don't like this little sliver that's remaining here, so I'm just gonna crop that out. Just so it's just the open window, it just kind of goes into nothing, it trails off out of the frame. And with the oranges here, I do want those oranges to stick out a little bit more, so I'm going to go to the luminance and I'm going to just bring the oranges up so that they stand out. I'm going to view a before and after, and I think that looks fine. I could take the blues out here in the saturation of the blues, and then I could change the brightness of the blues. Now you can see like there's a lot of blues in the countertop, the door, the wall, outside the window. So I can bring those up and it'll help just in itself to create contrast in the peeling paint, in that drawer, all that stuff. I want to be careful that I don't do too much to the outside with the tree branches, but I think that looks okay. So now before and after. And like I said earlier, you know, sometimes I'll go in and I'll do dodging and burning in Photoshop later on, and that's the case where I would dodge and burn, you know, maybe specific areas like this this door, or this door, or, you know, these little peeling paint areas, or some of these boards. You can do the lazy dodging and burning in Lightroom for the boards, where you could kind of, you know, grab a little brush here, make sure it doesn't affect too much of this, and then you can go straight to your clarity slider and bring that up just a little bit. I don't want to overdo it, you know, I don't want to do like, you know, 100% where it's looking like that, but, you know, bring it 18 or so, and that adds a little bit of contrast. Basically, it's adjusting like a micro contrast kind of thing in your shadows and your highlights. It's just kind of doing that and creating contrast in a way like that and sharpening it a little bit. I don't really like using clarity. I used to use clarity a lot, and I still use it sometimes, but it really depends on what I'm doing and what I'm trying to go for. I know I'm not going to make it through all these images for this video. They're pretty much all going to be the same workflow as far as editing goes. You know, with this picture, the trolleys, I would start off by cropping it, you know, rotating it a little bit because I just feel like it's a little bit off. The sky's a little bit bright here. You can see there's magenta around those tree branches, and that's from that's just fringing around the edges, just from the harsh transition from the bright to the dark and the optics of the lens glass and everything. It's a lot to explain, but yeah, so there's a defringe option in the lens corrections. I'll do that, get rid of that. The sky's a little bit bright. I'm not too worried about that. I can bring the highlights down. I can bring the white level down, and that helps bring back some of that information around the tree branches. So the sky looks nice to me. That looks fine. It's not too bright. The trolleys look okay. I'm gonna grab a brush, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint along just the trolleys here, and I'm going to bring the shadows up a little bit to help compensate for the highlight and the white point. Bring the white point up, black point down, just add a little bit of contrast into it. It looks a little bit magenta. I might take it a little bit green, and I might warm it up just a tiny bit. I'll saturate it a little bit by using the vibrance, and I'm gonna come straight down to the color grading. Now, a lot of people wait until the very end to do color grading. Sometimes I like to just throw color grading into the middle if I'm just trying to figure out a look that I wanna go for. It helps kind of influence my other decisions that I make. So, you know, I'll go in here and I'll do this. Kind of like that. Again, I'll take my balance up, and then I'll skip the midtones and I'll go straight to the highlights. Yellow, I don't really like the yellow. I kind of like that aqua or blue. I like that, but I don't like that much saturation on it. So yeah, take it down a little bit. That warms it up a little bit. I don't know if I like the cooler or the warmer. I kind of like the warm. Maybe I'll take that down. Maybe I'll just get rid of the highlights almost entirely. I like that. I mean, that's enough. You know, maybe I want to get this green to stand out a little bit, the green and the yellow. So I'll bring the luminance of the yellow up, saturation of the green, saturation of the yellow, saturation of the green back down. Maybe I'll bring the yellows a little bit more towards the green, just a little bit, not too much. Maybe I can bring the aquas up, and that'll probably affect some of this graffiti here. Yeah, you can see a lot of that graffiti's getting affected. As long as the sky's not getting affected by that, I'm gonna push it quite a bit. And maybe I'll bring a slight little curve to it again, and I'll bring the shadows up or the black point up just a tiny bit. And I'll bring the white point down just a little bit also, just to help kind of smooth these highlights out. I could take a radial gradient, and with this radial gradient, I can just adjust the shadows a little bit here, take the black point down and the white point up, and that just helps kind of, and I'll bring the highlights down a little bit, and that just helps really focus on this middle point here. And yeah, I mean, I think that's good. And yeah, I mean, the workflow for these other ones would pretty much be the same. So just for sake of time, I'm not gonna go through all these images, but that gives you an idea of how I would do my general edits, you know, how I approach them, the order that I go in things. I'm still in this dramatic light, but I kind of like it, so I'm not gonna change it. So hopefully this was at least somewhat helpful. It probably wasn't. I hope it was though. You know, like I said, my workflow might not work for you at all. Let me know what you would like explained, and I can make specific explanation videos on those things. Hopefully I'll get better at doing this because I suck at being on this side of the camera. Anyway, I hope that you can take at least one or two things away from this video. And if not, maybe it was just interesting to see how I go about editing my photos. If neither of those things, then I just wasted a whole bunch of your time, and no, I'm not sorry. That's your own fault. You watched the whole video. That you have nobody to blame but yourself. So yeah, this looks a lot better. I probably should have just moved the camera over here